Perfect. So we're just gonna do some introductions. We can go clockwise.
I'm Jeff Brown, the planning and building director.
Sorry, I'm Vicky Ewan, I'm an at-large member.
Fabulous in planning commission.
Denise Walker, representing the Human Rights Commission.
Mike Cooper with Walker Creek Neighborhoods, the developer representative.
Grant Swift, represent what, open space?
Bill Watson, planning commission. Phillips, planning commission.
Joe Smith, planning commission.
Todd Megan, backup person, to the senior advisory board.
Kate Williams representing the Urban Renewal Authority.
Guy Higgins, senior advisory board.
Excuse me. Mark Ortiz, planning commission.
The team on your G planning commission.
Stu Fineglass with the Sustainability and Resiliency Board.
Seth White, I'm an at-large member.
Darcy Thomas with planning commission.
Sean, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit about?
Yeah, thanks, everyone. Great to see you. My name is Sean Suter. I'm lead principal and founder of ZoneCo, lead consultant on this project. You all know Nolan Nicase. You, I think, worked with him on a couple of prior meetings. He's also working on the project with me, but I'll be leading the project going forward. And it's great to be with you all tonight. Thank you.
So the main discussion item we had this evening included starting to kind of get into a bit of the more finer grained details for the new regulations for our existing neighborhoods. And then we'll have Sean following that towards the end of the meeting. He'll provide an update, which is kind of what to expect over the next few months as we're doing some engagement planning, as we're kind of looking at the rest of the other kind of portions of the new code. And so that said, I'm going to go ahead and Sean, I'll share my screen so you can see this too, but we're going to do a staff presentation, and we can also, if you have questions throughout it, feel free to raise your hand or just speak up. Great, so yeah, so the main kind of focus of tonight is really starting to get into the actual regulations for some of our existing residential neighborhoods. And so we'd like to provide just a staff presentation that'll include some background information, what's been happening over the last few months, what to expect moving forward. There's some activity, you could say, at the state level in terms of legislation that will likely impact the project. And then we have some introductory materials just to kind of start priming the pump for the discussion. I think we can kind of as a group decide if it's best, since we only have one item, to just talk as a full group, or if the breakout sessions like y'all had in the last couple of meetings seem to work well. We're kind of open to either and can be flexible for that. And so it'll really be up to the team here. It's been a few months since we've met. It's really nice to see everyone. We wanted to kind of just give an update on some of the things we've been working on. So in the late summer is when we last met. So we've met 3 times so far. We've really dived into all of the different zone districts and talked a little bit about kind of the intent statements, the desired form, the uses, and so on. And so we then needed some time with the consultants to start drilling down a little bit further into those details. There was also a number of priority projects from the city that kind of required us to slow down a little bit with this project in order to get those accomplished in the fall of last year. So just to highlight a few of them, we're really excited to get our first multimodal transportation plan adopted. And that was a big deal for the city. This is a long-term vision for how folks will, walk, ride their bike, drive a car, take transit, and how freight moves throughout the city. Includes different modal plans to tackle each of those forms of transportation. It includes street cross sections, so kind of the makeup of streets and where we would see them going in the future, which has a direct correlation with this code project, because we'll likely be incorporating those in some form of new code. and a lot about connectivity. We had a big effort on our 2021 building code adoption. So we do those every 3 years, and there was a big push to do some sustainability strengthening amendments as well as some fire protection amendments as well. And then there were 2 land use code amendment projects. One was about accessory dwelling units. And so right now, historically, they've been allowed in the Old Town residential area. This project opened that up citywide. And it also allowed different types of ADUs to be built, not only detached, but also interior to the property, like in a basement upstairs, as well as attached to the house. And then we went through a similar process for short-term rentals. It was already happening. Our codes weren't up to date to actually address them. And so we adopted regulations that allow them as an accessory use to residential uses with certain limitations. And so those were 4 of the big projects we were working on in the fall. We're happy to dive into those at all, but yeah, that's kind of has been our recent last few months. So where are we now? Sean's going to talk in a little bit more detail about this later. But right now we're in this kind of calibration phase. So we've identified these different zone districts that we're interested in framing the new code around. We've started to develop those standards. And over the next month throughout March, we'll be further developing essentially the rest of the zone standards and starting to engage with the working group again in the April, May, June timeframe. It's at that point we'll also be doing some more community-wide engagement that Sean can get into a little bit later. And at the end of that timeframe, we'd hope to have kind of the actual code language in draft form ready for the zone districts. So then there's the next step, the third step, this codify, which is really everything else. And so that's like our sign regulations, floodplain, wildlife standards, subdivisions, review processes, and things like that. And that would likely take us through really the rest of the year, with our goal being to have a draft code by the end of the year. So Sean will give a little bit more detail, but that's sort of at a high level of where we are. And so this might look familiar. We included these in the packet, just kind of as a reminder, the different zones that we've been kind of discussing over the last couple of meetings. And so you remember we wanted to frame the new zones around neighborhoods, centers, corridors, and districts. And so we're collapsing several zone districts into one in a lot of cases, creating new zone districts in others. This was in your packet. I also have a printout of this if anyone's interested in kind of looking at these as well, because I see you're reading the screen. So you can do that to Grant. We don't have a second one, but we can share.
That's a model.
Yeah,
How many people would like a paper copy?
of the packet. 1, 2, 3. Oh, 3 more.
Including the attachment.
Yeah, whole packet. Thanks. And so tonight we're really hoping to talk about 3 of the neighborhood zone districts that we previously discussed. And in the packet, there's a table that includes some of the initial standards that we've begun developing for those. Those 3, we'll just quickly kind of run through them just as a reminder. The first one was neighborhood 2 rural. And so the 2 in these zone districts just is a reference to 2-story buildings generally throughout the zone. This rural district includes 2 existing zones that are shown here, and it's really just 2 different areas of the city on the western edges of the city. And so really the purpose here is to acknowledge the existing large lot 2-story homes that are in the area. We can talk with this group about whether or not it's appropriate to consider adding additional kind of context sensitive attached housing types like we're talking about for the N2 district. That's something that it would be really helpful for the working group's input. And then in general, we're not necessarily looking to replicate this throughout the city. So it's not necessarily intended for new neighborhoods, for large scale redevelopments, but really to acknowledge what's there. And in a similar vein, the neighborhood 2 district is really the residential core of the city. This is the majority of our residentially zoned land here in Lafayette. Our goal here is to, again, maintain the built environment, so 2 stories, while allowing some lot-specific reinvestment and introducing those context-sensitive housing types that we'll get into tonight. The neighborhood 3, which is our multifamily, high-density residential zone districts, shown kind of scattered throughout the city here, is really the same intent as the N2 district, but is more intense with existing multifamily housing as well as some single-family housing in some of these areas. Some of the main kind of development differences here, as it notes here, is shallower setbacks, closer spacing to buildings, substituting individual yards for common areas and so forth. And then there's the legislative session. So this has been keeping us a little bit busy. Have folks heard about this, like on the news or? Yeah. So in 2023, there was a land use bill last year, a bill 214. That was a huge, it was pretty controversial, I think statewide, and it would have rewrote a lot of the planning processes throughout the state, and that ultimately failed. So this year, the legislature's back. There's a lot of interest in housing and planning issues, transportation as well. And so instead of one giant bill, there's a lot of large, medium and small bills kind of being introduced. And a lot of those are probably going to have some form of impact to this project. And so the one that's probably going to have the most impact is the transit-oriented communities. This was introduced last week, I believe, early last week. And overall, it's intended to promote and support transit-oriented development, which as a core kind of value and concept is something that the city supports. But the bill does legislate how cities should do that and reach that goal. So without getting too down into the weeds, we're going to brief council next Tuesday on this bill. But it essentially creates buffers, if you could imagine, around future planned bus rapid transit stations. So a half-mile buffer and then a quarter-mile buffer along a route, along high-frequency transit routes. And so in Lafayette, that would be the jump route, basically from the park and ride up to Arapahoe. And then it looks at that area and it says, we're going to calculate a housing goal based on a density number. And so the density number in this case would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, 40 dwelling units per acre.
Don't say it, yeah.
Yeah. And so the bill says, okay, you have this number, this is your housing goal, and you need to create a zone district and standards that allow that to happen, basically, in those areas. So it has given Lafayette's, we're a compact city, we have a lot of roadways and a lot of plans for BRT, bus rapid transit. It could impact us pretty severely. And so we're looking at it pretty closely and monitoring it and engaging with council. Yeah, there's some other ones just to quickly, there's a bill that would prohibit cities from enacting minimum parking requirements. So right now, most codes, including ours, say if you build a house, you need 2 parking spaces. If you build an office, you need X per square footage. This would allow for parking maximums, but not minimums. Accessory dwelling units, this would allow it by right, and which is something that we already do, though it would prohibit certain requirements, like you wouldn't be able to allow or require parking as associated with an accessory dwelling unit. So, and then that also does include a incentive program if you meet certain criteria that would include monetary grants. There is a residential occupancy limits that we'll touch on in just a moment. And then a landscaping bill that would prohibit local governments from allowing non-functional turf, artificial turf in non-residential projects. So we think these will all in some way probably impact the project. The session ends in May. We're tracking it, but I think we're still gonna keep moving ahead as planned right now. So getting into existing neighborhoods. So this is, before tackling some of the bigger areas of the city, we wanted to really start with the residential core of the city because we're not anticipating large scale changes in those areas. So our approach to this per the comp plan is to really respect what's there. So there's existing development, it's approved, it's there, but make strategic changes that are a direct result of the comprehensive plan. And so we ideally at the end of this, towards the summer, we'd be able to have, be able to communicate to residents these are the specific changes that would happen with this new code to your property. And so it's not to help them kind of just understand the scope and breadth of the new code. So the specific things that we're looking at, housing choice, which is tonight's discussion, that's really introducing those attached housing types in specific locations that the comprehensive plan talks through. Neighborhood serving commercial. So this is a thing that we brought up at a previous meeting that is still sort of in our parking lot of issues that we need to talk about. But this would be, explore allowing some kind of small scale businesses incorporated into a neighborhood, ideally, things that the neighborhood would benefit the neighborhood, like shops, cafes and things like that. So we've provided some options. I think we probably want to re-noodle on those options a little and bring that back to the working group, probably in April with that. The definition of family. So zoning codes for the last several decades have included a definition of family, and that is regulated basically occupancy of a dwelling unit. And so by unrelated people. And so in Lafayette, that is definition of family regulates up to 3 unrelated persons in a dwelling unit. We went through some internal discussions over the last month or so, and came up with a memo we can share with you after this meeting, that it has some different options and a recommendation. 2 days after drafting the memo, the state introduced legislation that would prohibit us from having the definition of a family in certain respects. So I think we're gonna have to see where that lands. But we didn't want to make the packet too large. And so we'll send that after this meeting for y'all to take a look at.
That also kind of goes into the housing choice thing, because when these definitions were made, they had the nuclear family in mind, and the nuclear family is no longer the dominant living arrangement in the country. And so allowing different people with different relationships with each other to occupy these homes is a form of housing choice. And so that's why this is an important conversation.
And then the last one, plan unit development. So PUDs were introduced decades ago to offer more flexibility for development projects. Though when they're approved, they could be its own kind of set of mini regulations. And when you start approving a lot of them, like we have, it's really hard to administer different sets of rules for all these different properties. And so what we're interested in doing is converting these PUDs to a straight zone district. But in order to do that, we want to make sure we don't create a lot of headaches for the property owners that were approved under these PUDs. And so to accomplish that, we're going to look at alternative standards that would ensure that these properties that were approved through a PUD and maybe they got a closer setback or some sort of other waiver of another standard, that they don't run into issues when they want to expand or do something else with their property. So that's our goal. And then Jeff had a few comments about this one.
Yeah, like plan unit developments, PUDs. A lot of communities put them in place because they wanted a way to be a little bit more creative with land development. But what it ended up turning into is like just a Band-Aid on just ineffective zoning for communities. And so the city has over how many PUDs? 100 PUDs? And they're like mini zone districts in their own right. And so it results in a lack of consistency about development standards within the community. Sometimes in the spirit of creativity, but oftentimes in the spirit of getting around some sort of regulation. And allows for inconsistent uses on very similar property throughout the community. So like one property could be zoned commercial and allows a restaurant. Well, the same property could be zoned commercial and not allow a restaurant. For no apparent reason. So transitioning away to PUDs is a big goal of this project. And there's two kind of things that we want to introduce the team to that you'll start seeing be used throughout the zoning code. The first one is something called a conditional use. So right now our zoning code has uses by right, so permitted uses that are just subject to the base development standards within that particular zone district. We have uses by special review, which are allowed uses, but that could have a potential impact that needs to be more closely evaluated and mitigated based upon locational circumstances around that development. We have non-permitted uses. And so what we're wanting to introduce is something called a conditional use. And a conditional use would be a permitted use, but it has a set of consistent standards that either deal with, location of the use, operational aspects of the use, or, some specific development standard that's not common throughout the rest of the zone district. And so in the context of transitioning away from PUDs, we have a lot of mixed housing neighborhoods, which is a good thing. It's a goal of the comprehensive plan, as well, but when we're looking at consolidating the PUDs into the N2 or the N3 zone district, we'll have, duplexes, townhomes, and some apartment buildings within these zone districts that, may not fit within the expansion parameters that we're talking about now. So we would describe those as a conditional use that would allow those to be conforming. So there's not, an issue with the property and financing that property or taking a loan out on the property. And would allow it to be rebuilt in case of a natural disaster or a fire or something like that. But it wouldn't allow that use to be propagated throughout that entire zone district. And so, the condition would be, if it's pre-existing on a lot and it was legally permitted, it's allowed to continue, allowed to be rebuilt on that lot, even if it doesn't meet the other standards for, that. And so another, condition could be like, if we decide to allow duplexes or triplexes on corner lots, that would be a condition of that particular multi-family use on there. And this concept can be, expanded to all the other zone districts and uses, where we might, have conditions around a drive-through or conditions around an outdoor patio attached to a restaurant that's in proximity of a residential home. And so that's kind of the concept of conditional uses. And so you'll see us start to introduce that concept in the residential zone districts, but also in the commercial zone districts as well.
Jeff, do you have to go through approvals then?
No,
It's like used by special review or different?
no, it's meant to be a use by right with additional parameters associated with that use. And then the special use review would still be a thing in our code, that you'll see pop up too. And then the alternative standards, Phil kind of touched upon this. Our PUDs, introduced different setbacks, different lot coverages, different heights, all within just all the different areas of our neighborhood. And we want to not make that illegal and want to have people to still have the right to invest in their property, while not meeting the basic standard of there. So we don't have these drafted yet, but we'll be drafting these alternative standards that could apply if somebody has, a lot that was developed under a PUD. An example could be front setback. Some PUDs, allow less than a 20-foot front setback. And the alternative standard could be if your block face, has buildings or homes setback at 15 feet, then your front setback will therefore be 15 feet for that particular, addition or rebuild or anything like that. So those are the two kind of tools that we're gonna be employing to kind of get away from these PUDs. We're not introducing a lot of nonconformities, into the code.
Everyone's aware with nonconformities, that term. So if we change the rules and it was already built legally, then it's non-conforming, and traditionally it could exist, but it couldn't expand and become more non-conforming. If that makes sense. So just to run through a few of the table changes before starting to dive into the discussion. We looked a little bit at the minimum and maximum lot sizes. So generally speaking, the lot sizes in Lafayette are fairly large for a single family detached dwelling, at 7,000 square feet. Many of the properties, like the ones shown here, are greater than that. But what we've seen is that when there's a large lot size, that building envelope, when you consider the setbacks, like the amount of the property you can build in, becomes quite large. And when that happens, you just get very large buildings. And there's some affordability implications for those. Additionally, we've approved some PUDs with smaller lot sizes as well. And so what we're looking at for these is lot size, decreasing that lot size from 7,000 to 5,000 square feet. minimum lot size, just to be consistent with the newer PUDs and what we just mentioned. And then we're also looking at a maximum lot size, so this would limit combining multiple lots into one and creating kind of very large buildings within an environment like this that would clash with the surrounding character of the neighborhood. And so when we're talking about introducing different housing types, like on a corner lot, in this case, we want to avoid necessarily that lot then being combined with the next one or two lots and creating one very large structure by right, if that makes sense. So that's something that we'd like to look into as well as we're talking about these different housing types. Something's going on here. So we're also introducing concept of encroachments. And so these would be things like architectural features, porches and so forth that would actually by right be able to encroach into the required setback without having to go through some kind of special approval. And so in this case, perhaps a house and the garage would be built to a setback line, and oftentimes you see the porch either at that line or stepped back. And so the first thing you see is a garage. We want to promote more, for example, porches being constructed or expanded, then that porch could then protrude a bit into the setback. And so there's a table in the attachment that includes some initial encroachments that we'd like to look into. We just talked a little bit about the conditional uses. The side street setbacks. So setbacks in general just refer to the distance from a property line backwards that needs to be free and clear from the ground up. So usually there's a front, a rear, and then side setbacks, and that's how our code is situated. In Old Town, there's also a side setback for corner lots. That's a side street setback, and so that's a little bit different when there's a street instead of an interior lot line. We'd like to expand that requirement citywide, and so that's also included in the table. And then there's the side interior setbacks, which kind of goes along with looking at standards for attached housing types in these areas. So a lot of times, like the duplex shown here in Lafayette, it straddles those two lot lines. And so previously you'd have to get I think you'd have to go get a PUD in order to not have a 5-foot setback on either end, which wouldn't work for a duplex, right? So we're trying to fix some of those things and make it a little bit easier for these things to happen. So the big implementation question we had is really comes from the comprehensive plan. That's tonight's discussion, is whether or not these attached housing types like duplexes and triplexes should be permitted on corner lots, along collectors in existing neighborhoods, as stated in the comp plan. So just to terminology, I guess before kind of diving into it, I think it's pretty obvious what a corner lot is, but it's generally situated at an intersection of two or more streets. Here's one in Indian Peaks, just as an example shown in red. Collector streets, these are medium-sized streets, generally moves traffic from local streets within residential areas to larger arterial roadways. And what's shown here is just basically the network of collector streets in Lafayette. And so when the comp plan talks about corner lots and collectors, kind of these are sort of the areas that we look at then to try to implement that policy. And so when we were thinking about this, like, how do we have this conversation? We were thinking in terms of what, where, and how. And so, like, what building types are appropriate in Lafayette? Where would they be appropriate? So corner lots, collectors, some other location, and then how. So are there specific standards, limitations, or things that would make them appropriate in those locations? And so the conversation about corners and collectors is really focused on a smaller scale of homes that ideally could fit seamlessly into some of these predominantly single-family residential neighborhoods. And so the diagram at the bottom just shows kind of missing middles is a really big phrase that's being used a lot right now, but it's also kind of like house scale is another way to think about it instead of block scale. But house scale options, duplexes, triplexes, maybe quadplexes, things that would be in a similar scale to some of the buildings that we're seeing in these existing neighborhoods. you'll notice it's not going up to like the larger townhomes, the live work, the mid-rise units and things like that, because we're that the house scale. And so in the memo, we call them options. I think the better thing to call these are ideas. I think it's something to start the discussion with the working group of ways that we might be able to implement this policy. So there's maps over there that were included in the packet, but also printed out that show just a few different ideas that we can kind of talk through. One would be really fully implementing that comp plan policy of allowing these in these attached housing types, in this case, duplexes and triplexes on corner lots and collectors in these neighborhoods. What we're seeing in those is that as shown here on Indian Peaks, is that the collectors run through some neighborhoods where folks probably wouldn't expect this level of change to occur. And so that's something that we noticed that when actually doing the mapping of these, that was something that we need to just kind of think through. Down a degree from that would be to just look at the corner lots and kind of just maybe start introducing a duplex typology. And then we could also look at, should we tie this to some, when a bus rapid transit station is being built, should we also have something in there around within a certain proximity from that station, we should allow certain housing types. So we wanted to put ideas out there. I don't think that we'll land on one of these, but maybe a combination or maybe something else, but something to kind of get the conversation going. And then how, yeah.
So, and if this sounds stupid, I apologize, but things already exist there, right? So it would be rezoned if somebody wanted to do an addition or they were tearing it down?
Yeah, it could be, I have some examples that might be helpful in just a couple of slides, but yeah, it might be, if you live on a corner lot and that lot is this large, then you've just unlocked the ability to do a duplex. And so maybe that means internal kind of putting up a wall or a floor to kind of separate that and turn it into a duplex. We could also look at if it's a certain configuration and size, maybe there's a triplex. We can, there's probably different ways.
To expand, like, it would require either internal subdivision of the home or an scrape and rebuild. And the topic is, you know, the comp plan says something along the lines of like soft density should be introduced into existing neighborhoods on corner lots and collectors. And so that would be a by right thing, depending on what idea we settle on. Another idea is also just do nothing at this point.
Yeah, it was option 4.
Yeah, option 4.
Yeah.
So like we can do it a different day, but or another time. But these were the idea 1 was full implementation of what the comp plan policy was, and then these are just different variations on that. But how it would manifest itself, it would require somebody to do something
Right,
on the existing lot.
okay.
And how, like, the duplexes that exist now, are they specially permitted? Like in the cases where there are some, I know in Old Town where there used to be one house, now there's a duplex, how did that happen?
Duplexes are allowed by right in Old Town. So if you see a duplex, it's typically was permitted under the zone district. Within Old Town though, the standards are, there was not that demising wall setback. So in order to enable a duplex where each unit resides on its own lot, you have to do a PUD, create that 0 lot setback, and to create a modification to the lot frontage and the lot size. But most of them are, you still have to meet the underlining overall lot size, which in Old Town I think is 7,000 square feet. And then you can have 2 units on a 7,000 square foot lot.
Did you have your interviews? Okay. Yeah, and that process would be coming in for a permit.
Yeah.
The PUD wasn't required, but cuts out a whole.
Yeah. You could do a duplex in Old Town with a condo, as a condo, without doing a PUD.
And you wouldn't have to get a new lot line, you wouldn't have to like replat.
That's correct.
Couldn't you just change the rules of that zone designation, just add that?
Yeah, that's
It's
kind
not
of,
working, just change it.
no, that's kind of one of the fixes that we're talking about here is like,
No, but in the past, could you just change that added that provision in your zoning code?
Yeah, you can modify the standards, yes, yeah. I don't know why it wasn't done in the past.
It seems easier to change the code than do much.
Yeah.
PUDs.
Yes.
If you're building something new, then there usually is, I'm assuming, you know. There would have been, if it was a single family and then you wanna build a duplex, single family, when it was built, there was, various fees for water taps, sewage, all of that. So if somebody knocked down a single family and then put up a duplex.
They
how
still,
does-
yeah,
how
they
does
still
that
have to
work?
they have to pay any additional tap fees or impact fees for that additional unit.
Okay, so it would be additional fees then?
Yeah.
And you would need the 2 taps for the duplex.
Yes.
We had a couple of examples, when thinking about, so to help facilitate the discussion, we have these little kind of pamphlets that you can jot some notes down and we could go over. Sure. So in thinking about this, you know, when we're talking about these like house scale introductions into these neighborhoods, what's kind of coming to our mind was like the word fit, like, does it fit? And so looking at these pictures on the left, it may be in, at least on the top one, a similar height, but the bulk and the massing, it doesn't really fit within the neighborhood, right? Whereas the one on the right, it's a duplex, but it looks pretty similar. And so like for me, within thinking about this, like in a city, like you're driving through it and it should feel kind of cohesive, right? And it should feel like a neighborhood, and then you get to a certain point and it turns into a different type of neighborhood. Maybe it's taller, whatever. But it should feel that way. But when you're walking in some of these areas, you start to see like little hints and it's like, oh, that has 4 mailboxes, right? Even though the bulk and the mass is similar to the others. This is one in Boulder. I think this building is like 90 years old, but it's a duplex, but you wouldn't know it from the street. So looking at it from the left is the primary street. And then when you walk around the corner, you see this almost hidden second entrance. And that's the second unit entrance into that home. Here's another example. I think this is in the Old Town area of Fort Collins. And so pretty nice buildings, but as you look a little bit closer, you see like, oh, this house has 2 entrances, so it's a duplex. Here's another hidden one. This, Vicky, kind of was the one that reminded me, and when you mentioned yours, is there's a little door here, and then there's actually a little address above it too. And so it's just another small kind of duplex in Fort Collins. And so when thinking about this, I think we're really trying to get a good match for these neighborhoods if we're going to introduce them, because what we've seen sometimes when something's been added mid-block that doesn't fit with the other homes, there's some issues that come up and folks aren't super thrilled about that sometimes. So
With this example, why is that not an ADU?
the assessor says it's duplex, so I don't know. A lot of them, yeah. So it
There's
just,
definitional.
an ADU is limited to on size. So the big difference there would be the ADU in Lafayette would be limited to 750 square feet, whereas a duplex could be, more than that.
Even though there's a whole primary structure, that's going to be going away, right?
Nope,
Primary structure on a lot, that one primary structure on a
Oh.
lot.
we haven't gotten into that one building on a lot, question, because we've talked a little bit about cottage courts and things like that, and so I think that's to be discussed, yeah. The only other thing, we wanted to mention and kind of close on was, like a lot of the state legislation is talking about density, and if you hang out with Jeff long enough, you'll hear him say density is just a number. Anyway, so in looking at these two buildings, there's like a block scale and a house scale, right? But they do have something in common, is that they're both 30 units per acre. And so the one on the left is, would essentially overlay over numerous lots that a traditional home would be on. It's 3 stories, 60 units, whereas this other home that might, depending on the neighborhood, kind of zooming out of the photo, might fit in a bit better into this neighborhood, includes 5 units. It's still the same density, but it looks and feels a lot different. And so As we're talking about this, we're really trying to transition away from like density as a number and more towards like design. And being intentional about how, buildings fit within their surroundings, so. That's our staff presentation. Suggested discussion, so I'm getting a sense, do y'all just wanna have a group discussion? And we can kind of go through, does that sound good to y'all, because we don't wanna stay here too terribly late, and so. That said, are there any clarifying questions or things we just went over?
Yeah, I have, three, I guess, little ones. So the, right now we have R1 and R2, which means single family or duplexes. They're gonna move to N2, which is more based on stories, instead of form based. Like, idea, right? And N3 and so forth. So the neighborhood 2, which is probably the biggest residential area of Lafayette, like, well, right now, some parts of those are R2 and some of them are R1. So right now, in some places, duplexes are already allowed. Do you have a feel for how much of this is R1 versus R2 right now? Just ballpark.
Yeah, it's shown here on the map. I don't have the exact numbers. When we looked at the numbers that were included in the staff report, we specifically looked at the R1 areas that.
I didn't read the
Yeah.
legend. Okay, so
Yeah.
bright yellow is R2, the minority is the R2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that collector corner lot analysis was real quick, and we kind of just went around and looked at all of those that didn't already have some kind of duplex on it, only in that R1, because it's already kind of anticipated there, so.
So a pretty good part of R1 would become R2. If, depending on which, there's different examples or ideas or what have you.
Yeah. And
Several of those mean a lot of that would, R1 would become R2.
Well, that's where the condition use is like, so we want to be intentional where duplexes are allowed. So duplexes would be allowed where they currently exist, or would be allowed in new places based upon the discussion and implementation.
Like the corners or
Like,
like.
exactly.
so, yeah, it wouldn't become R2. Well, here, multi-family buildings here, they could be rebuilt the same. But across the street here, where it's now R1, the only change that we're talking about in terms of the housing type would be these corner lot collector things, so it wouldn't open up the whole neighborhood.
Yeah, and just because something's zoned, something doesn't mean it exists. So, there's a big portion of R2 that's a mobile home park right now.
Right,
And then over in Indian Peaks, it's all single family detached. So just because it's zoned something doesn't necessarily mean it manifested itself.
but it means it could be in the future.
Oh, it could, yeah, but it could go both ways, right? So
Yeah.
we're kind of talking about rebalancing that.
Yeah.
Because there could be some lots that are currently entitled to duplexes that would not be entitled to that duplex if they don't meet the new.
Right, so
Yeah.
that little sort of one of those tan areas that's a mobile home park would presumably fall under our mobile home park zoning going
Yep.
forward.
Yeah,
Exactly, yeah.
Two other little ones. One, so the zero lot line. I mean, yeah, I've always thought that was kind of, just a make work project where you have to get a PUD for a zero lot line, and we already allow duplexes in our twos, right? And so what you distinguish between like a side setback and an interior setback. And the interior setback was one house right next to the other, that's a duplex. But was that an interior setback, the non-street facing setback, is that gonna jump across existing lot lines? For example, if you buy this lot and you tear them both down, can you build row houses?
not if we don't allow that. So
That's just a corner case, but it's something to think about,
Yeah.
because that's something, that interior zero setback. It goes this way and that way, along the street and perpendicular to the street. They're
No, I
not- they're-
No, like on the attachments. So on page 18. And page 19, or excuse me, page 18, 19, and 20. So we're gonna have different setbacks by building type. So, if the lot is not entitled or not permitted to have a duplex, you don't have that 0 lot interior setback, you still have the 5-foot setback or whatever it is. So only it's on lots that are going to be authorized to have that building type. So, again, if it's one of these new soft infill lots, then it would be specific to that lot. We wouldn't do it so you can combine and
Lot to lot.
lot to lot, yeah, and that's where the maximum lot size starts to come in a little bit too. Is because, you know, with the examples that Phil was showing, house scaled multifamily, is like, the idea is that if the benchmark is the single family detached housing type, and it's on a 10,000 square foot lot, and you could build a 7,000 square foot home on that lot, then can you build the same thing, but internally it's a duplex or a triplex? But the bulk and the mass and the architecture are the same, rather than starting to consolidate lots, because this is a problem. It's not a problem in Lafayette, but it's a problem where you have neighborhoods that have lower property values that become attractive for people with means to acquire the land. The land becomes more valuable than the home. And then they start acquiring multiple properties and consolidating them and building bigger homes on that.
Yeah,
So, yeah, so
there's a lot of that in Denver.
yes, there is. And in the inner suburbs too. And it's gonna come to Lafayette at some point as well, so.
Oh, sorry, one other little one, just to make sure I'm clear as well. So if we go with a minimum lot size of 5,000, what that means is if you have, you know, a lot that's 6,000 square feet, I don't know what the lot sizes typically are in these proposed M2 areas, but let's say there's gotta be some under 10,000. That means you can't build a duplex there. Because you need 2 lots of 5,000. Right? You have to have at least a 10,000 square foot lot to split it, make a 0 lot line and still meet the lot minimums.
No,
Well, one of the ways we were looking to frame it, and that's a really good point, is through building types. And so in the attachment, maybe I don't know, I have it easily on Warren's computer. We had a minimum lot size in this area based on the building type. And so for a single family dwelling, we were looking at it as a 5,000 square feet. But for a duplex, Jeff, if you can look at the table, it was less than that.
yeah, so again, the newer neighborhoods have the smaller lot sizes. So like the standard lot size in Lafayette is 7,000 square feet. I think that's R1 and R2. And the idea is if you allow a single family on a 7,000 square foot lot, you allow a duplex on 2 3,500 square foot lots. So same size building, it's just on 2 separate smaller lots, if that makes sense. Not increasing the lot size, because what that does is that will give you big buildings, big duplexes. Because the setbacks are to each lot, and so whereas you would have one smaller home on a smaller lot divided into 2, what you were talking about is if you require 2 full-size lots, you would have 2 full-size homes attached that would be larger than every other single family detached. in that
I
neighborhood.
get that, but mostly what we're talking about is built neighborhoods, so the lots already exist.
Mhm.
So the question just is where do you now, and basically we're talking about, and this isn't a change from R2, because in R2 bits of that, you can already do it. In the R1 neighborhood, you're talking about allowing duplexes, and on those lots, the actual minimum lot size would be smaller than 5,000. It would be
Yes.
half of that or so.
And we can run the analysis too, once we settle a little bit more on the actual lot sizes. And so in this case, the initial idea here was it would still be a 5,000 square foot lot for a duplex. Or it would be 2,500 if it was subdivided. So if you're making 2 lots out of that. So kind of keeping with the same scale of the rest of the neighborhood.
Yeah, and depending on what strategy we settle on, we'll probably need to do some modeling just to make sure we understand if there's unintended consequences around
I
that.
think the lot coverage, you know, the next one, like the difference between 30 and 40% lot coverage is a lot.
Yeah.
So seeing how that shakes out.
Yeah.
I just have a couple of questions, and I apologize if you've already talked about this before, because I haven't been here. I'm kind of a few water questions. So one is, do you know if you're planning to join the city's water plan along with the zoning plan to make sure there's enough water resources available to meet the design? That's one question. And you don't have to answer right away, you know. The other question, when it comes to the TOD neighborhood, I used to work for Westminster in water resources, and I worked on the comp plan there also. So that's where I'm from, because we dealt with TOD also in neighborhoods. And if the state requires it, that's kind of scary. But I also wonder, TOD neighborhoods also do require a lot of water, even though there's less water use per unit, it's more water use per acre. And so, again, question is, if they want to require something like that, can we meet that need with the water supply?
So it's something, there is a carve out in that bill, that would allow the city to do some analysis and show, here's what you're requiring of us. We don't have the water for it.
Good.
And then we have to resubmit it every few years or something to re-show it.
Okay,
But in general, yes, our water planning is tied to our comp plan.
good.
Yeah.
And so there's water planning going on right now. And we have projections in the comprehensive plan on population and unit counts. And we use that to help us figure out what our water treatment capacity is, what our water storage needs are. And under the city's code, development has to bring water rights to the city.
Yeah.
So, so that stuff is happening. It's tied together.
Good, glad to hear it. And of course, it's sewer lines, water lines, I mean.
All
You
of
put a
it.
big
Yeah.
load of a TOD development on that,
Yeah.
of course, the impact might be 2 miles away, and, getting
Yeah.
payment for that is.
Yeah, well, this is off topic, but if the state bill were to pass, it would blow up our comprehensive planning, so we would have to go back and assess that.
And then the other question about landscape plan, is that part of this project? That's gonna be a separate, I think you said.
We'll have new landscaping regulations. in-
Okay.
in the
Control
code.
water use
Yes.
and-
Yeah,
So I'm wondering if new construction is going to have some tighter regulations than existing when that was built. I know landscape plans changed over time, and
we will all be able to talk about that and make sure we're achieving those goals when we write the new regulations. Yeah, absolutely.
thank you very much.
Are you seeing a demand for this? Are you getting any inquiries from any builders or developers? And the second question is, are there certain lots that you see targeted where there's a smaller, older home from the early 20th century that's targeted, that's like, ooh, that was just ripe to get scraped and put a duplex or triplex on there? Is that a concern of yours to like get out in front of that? You see kind of those as.
Well, it's happening in Old Town. That's the area it's happening. It's not really happening outside of Old Town right now. But we know it's gonna be there, so that's why, like, we're interested in the maximum lot sizes, type stuff.
Okay, so mainly you're really thinking about Old Town, but because I don't see it citywide, I just don't see the.
It's not happening
the
citywide.
demand,
Yeah.
I mean, the economics are probably there.
Probably not, right? But there are some neighborhoods that probably are at risk.
I think there's things happening now that people would never have guessed would happen 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
and we're what, 25 years or 20?
This is like 40 years. We're 40 years into this code, so.
Well, yeah, into this, I mean, like, but this code is
Yeah.
meant to be planning for
Yeah.
what, the next 20, 25.
Can I have a question, sort of related to that? Does this code supersede an HOA? I mean, if an HOA says we can only have single family homes in this.
Yeah, so generally, if HOAs have more restrictive rules with the city, then the HOA rules would apply, but the city doesn't enforce that. They can't allow something that's not allowed under local law. Now, again, not to make this the topic of tonight, but the state legislature has been introducing topics that they prohibit HOAs from accepting landscape, bluegrass is one of those. There were some other ones last year, I think, too. So, yeah, there could be state preemption of that.
I mean, I'm just wondering, like with the duplexes on the corner, how many HOAs would allow that? I mean, is this just kind of a moot point?
I don't know, and it's kind of irrelevant for what we're doing, we can dig into that, but I think, I don't see it too often, it's more about the property needs to be used for residential uses, not commercial uses, so, but there could be some out there. Absolutely, yeah.
So can you repeat the potential legislation about the TOD and how that would impact? I think kind of nothing over, I just want.
Well, we just wrote a big memo on it, if you wanna
Yeah.
give a elevator.
So,
This is a hypothetical, this is not.
yeah, and we, like, there's scary numbers involved in this, but how they actually translate down to the lot is interesting. So, as drafted, the transit-oriented community bill basically says we have to identify areas, within a quarter of a mile of a, urban bus rapid transit line. And an urban bus rapid transit line is a BRT that operates on surface streets, not on freeways or limited access highways. And any local route that has a headway of 15 minutes or less at its highest frequency. So, and they also say we have to identify areas within a half a mile of a commuter BRT or a local line with a headway of 15 minutes or less that operates on primarily highways. And to combine the transit corridor and the transit station areas become the city's transit areas. And within those transit areas, we have to do a calculation that multiplies the acreage by 40, the use to the acre, to give us a housing goal. And that housing goal has to be enabled by zoning. So we have to put in place zoning rules that could allow up to that number of units within those areas, either uniformly, or we can concentrate it at the expense of lower densities in certain areas and so forth, but we have to at least enable it. It'll never be realized, but we have to enable it so it could be realized. 40 DUs to the acre is a fairly intense type of thing. And so what does that mean on a 7,000 square foot lot? It means somewhere between a 5-plex and a 7-plex on a 7,000 square foot lot, potentially.
Which is the average Old Town.
Yeah, which is the average lot, like minimum lot size throughout the community. So, it's kind of, last year's bill was about missing middle housing, some of the stuff about allowing missing middle housing everywhere by right. This is kind of a different way to get that, but around transit areas, but the way they're defining transit areas is very expansive. So the areas we're talking are very expansive, especially in Lafayette, so that's kind of what that means. And on top of that, while the housing opportunity goal is a gross density calculation, so it doesn't take into account like the physical parameters about what you can actually fit on a lot, it just acres times dwelling units. The way we have to craft our zoning is based upon a net density factor, which means we have to take into account setbacks, lot coverage, surface parking requirements. And so that will drive up the effective gross density allowance under the zoning as well. So it's a fairly one size all approach to this.
You're very clarifying.
Yeah, just, I don't wanna get into it, but like, I really appreciate the gentleman's questions about water. Is there gonna be opportunity throughout the life of this project for us to re-engage as a group about that? Or is that really not something we're in the market? It's kind of a big deal.
Yeah,
And it factors directly into all the development. We're talking about densification, use of resources, sustainability, all that stuff.
that's a separate effort. That's a separate effort. We will talk about water consumption based on landscaping, but
That's the only time we're really gonna get into any kind of water.
yeah, that doesn't mean that's not happening and that won't be engagement around it, but that's kind of not what the intent of this project is.
What kind of engagement, well, there will be engagement opportunities for that as part of going forward.
I would imagine. I don't know what that is because it's not a project that we're responsible for, but it's a lot of engineering that goes into those studies, so. But yeah, they're ongoing because it's just part of running a city. And so I wonder if we could maybe at some point, invite our public works, water engineers to maybe talk through what they're working on.
It'd be also interesting to see, to have an understanding, and I can't find it with a quick look of how much water savings will be happening because of code requirements and increased efficiency required by plumbing fixture codes and all that, so. Is it small? Perhaps, but maybe not.
But you might be able to put it into the zoning, some of those code requirements. You know, you can put it in several places, building code, zoning, comp plan, you have comp plans. I wouldn't make comp plans, I was thinking ODPs, I don't know if you do those here. No, but there's lots of opportunities to do that, and everyone works together on it, it's a lot easier to get on the same page, and if people are working across purposes or just working separately, trying to put it together at the end.
The other clarifying, but
I have just clarification. You talked about conditional use. And now would that be time specific or function specific? Say you get the conditional use for somebody to open up a nail parlor in the neighborhood and they go out of business and somebody says, well, I want to put a different business in there. And with the conditional use that allowed the business to be there, would that still transfer? Or am I way off?
You're not way off, but it's not really something we're focused on at the moment, but
Oh,
yeah,
they're-
yeah, I mean, if a use is allowed, it's allowed regardless of the owner that is attached to it. It's not something that requires special approval.
Okay.
Yes, well, I don't think we're gonna distinguish between a nail parlor and like maybe a bookstore. So if they're allowed and there's conditions associated with each of them, then they have to meet those conditions and they're allowed, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
One thing,
Yeah,
say it was an extreme thing from bookstore to gas station.
yeah, those would be two different uses.
So
Yeah.
it would be that function.
On the map on 21, I'm looking at some of the examples on, I just want to make sure I understand, like, I'm looking at like the little Sir Galahad square there, east. Yeah, so it looks like your corner lots are blue and your collector streets are purple, right? But something else must be going on, because that's not, you got a lot of interior lots there, blue. Is that like, just, this was
Yeah.
done quickly, or is there some other thing happening?
yeah, so I think the collector road goes up Sir Gallahan, I don't know if you can see the mouse, yeah. And so that would be the collector piece, and so that's where those purple ones are captured. These yellows are just the zone underneath it, so just, you can kind of ignore those, and then the corners in blue. And so these interior lots, the way comp plan's worded and the way this conversation is kind of happening is those you wouldn't see.
Yeah, right, but you've got corner lots on non-corners. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
sure I wasn't missing,
Here,
like on the,
yeah,
do you see that little chunk on the
Yeah.
east side? There?
Yeah,
Just
so
like a shortcut. that was done quickly.
it was a
Okay.
quick thing, yeah,
great.
so, yeah, but,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's good.
Transit, here's school.
These are all really good.
Yeah.
Right now, the height limit, we still have the 27 foot and we still have a 2-story. We haven't really or maybe you have pinned down where, how is that height measured? Is it, center line or pitch, or do we know what that definition is gonna be, or is that still evolving?
We don't have plans to change it right now unless it makes sense to change it, like, I think in Old Town, there might be some tweaks to how we calculate that, which might make sense to just propagate everywhere. And the reason I say that is Old Town does have a slightly different definition of height measurement, that's super precise, that's really hard to actually implement. So, and the intended outcomes, I don't know, are meeting the expectations of the neighborhood either, so we might learn some stuff from that might translate, just makes sense to do it in a way. So.
Yeah, knowing different ways that you can calculate them. I mean, in some neighborhoods it won't matter, it's everything if the lots are flat, but in other neighborhoods. It could be different.
Exactly, yeah.
So I guess in thinking through the bulk of the discussion now of kind of getting to a point of at least getting your temperature on some of these big questions, the kind of the what of the types of buildings that might be appropriate for the kind of context that we're talking about. So if you were thinking of these traditionally single-family detached homes in these neighborhoods, are the ones that we have on the screen, and we've included this, you can throw your name on it or not, and you can drop some notes down and we'll make sure that we include it in the meeting notes. Are we kind of heading in the right direction on some of these building types? When you look at a homes, a house, a duplex, triplex, what we're calling kind of a neighborhood townhouse and a quadplex, are some of these maybe a step too far? Are these pretty appropriate under certain conditions? Are there others that we should be considering as well? What are some of the reactions that you've had as we've kind of gone through this material this evening?
In form-based code, that's what determines what they look like that they look like single family houses, whatever size they are. It would be the form code that we.
Yeah, and in these areas, it probably won't be very super specific. But we want to figure out what standards make sense to achieve a more predictable outcome with the surrounding neighborhoods. I don't know exactly what those would look like. We'd probably want Sean's team to help us with that.
Yeah, like in the neighborhood town homes page here, the super modern one does not look like.
No,
homes, you know.
that's over in the Longmont. Yeah,
Yeah, but so I'm,
yep.
Prospect.
what we answer now,
Yep.
how do we make sure, like, maybe this doesn't happen here? But it's not the fact that it's a townhouse, it's the problem, the way it looks like.
Yeah, who else doesn't like the design of that? I think that's good to know. Yeah,
I mean, it's just,
Yeah.
and in terms of fit, if the intention is fit, there's not a lot of places that look like that right now, and there's some.
It's hard to thread the needle between controlling the architectural design and just allowing someone to, remember, be creative, eclectic, and diverse.
which that is.
That is, no accounting for taste. But you can paint that lots of colors, and you can, you can paint the house below that pink, and then you could argue that it's not very nice. But I think what might draw our eyes to some of these more than others is making sure that the buildings are articulated really well, and the massing is not just a big, stucco blob like we see all over at Denver, and that we don't get just symmetrical duplex, and then it starts to be articulated and broken down. And that I think is what the form-based code will help with. But it's hard to thread the needle, like I said, between the form-based and prescriptive, and getting an architectural design that everybody's going to say that's awesome. Not everybody will.
This will also apply to different neighborhoods that have different characteristics, and so we'll have to figure out that nice middle ground.
Will you then require sort of a design overlay based on the?
Yeah, that's a whole other.
Yeah,
The one thing that's,
That would be putting in a lot of weeds and a lot of work.
well, one thing to remember in the state of Colorado, there's no requirement to hire an architect or designer or anybody who Knows how to do that for a duplex or below, duplex or single family homes, you don't have to be a licensed architect. So,
My concern here, I think, for the most part, I think everything looks okay. But the height might be the biggest impact if it's, you know, a height differential between the existing neighborhood.
Mhm.
Yeah, that three-story triplex could feel out of character.
Well, 30 feet.
yeah, so, I mean, they won't be able to build, you know, they're just gonna, they would be. Yeah, I don't
Right,
know how you
that's
fit a
what-
triplex on seven, that's a lot of triplex.
That's what I'm trying to understand, like, with this, do I care if it's triplex, if it fits the form? I don't know.
No.
So I'm confused a little by the question, because
Well,
It
it
feels
could be
like-
3 stories tall,
I-
so then you get.
Yeah,
Well, and it could, what we're saying is it could.
yeah, I guess
you
that
know,
would,
that's kind
that
of
would
a
be in that
conversation.
N3, it could
Right.
be there.
Yeah.
In the N2, we're really looking at 2
Just
stories
2
and, or
stories.
2.5 in some cases, but.
isn't that a good reason to go with like the option 3, where the allowance is clustered around the bus rapid transit? Because I'm thinking that the downside to having like a quad or triplex is you just have more traffic. And if that traffic is pushed towards public transportation, then maybe you mitigate. I mean, would you, like, from a planner perspective, would you say that that is the most quote unquote sustainable from like a transportation?
I think a big question with that is how are the people actually gonna behave? Not how we think they're gonna behave,
Mhm.
how are they really gonna behave? Because people are contrary and we don't do what planners want us to do.
Well, I think that does, I mean, there's data around that, and I think that people tend to take the bus more often if the bus stop is within a certain proximity to their home. And so I guess like just thinking about the data, you know, or whatever, do you have opinions on like which ones of these options is more sustainable? Because you could imagine that potentially like the corridor option 2 maybe would lend itself more to that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, if you wanna, that's a good point. If we wanna, as a community, dip our toes into it, maybe one makes more sense than the other. It doesn't mean that we can't revisit this in the future. I will say, like, you know, household sizes are shrinking. The number of people living in the home are shrinking. And that translates to things like the viability of retail and other services to service the community. And so, if you have a triplex and there's only one person living in each unit, they're like small units, then
It's the same density.
it's
as
the
a
same
family.
density as
Yeah.
a small family, right? And yeah, if they're not near transit, they're not gonna use transit. That's the other thing. So,
So it's at least 3 additional cars, if not more.
yeah,
That's the whole idea by density and TOD, is that people are gonna use transit, not have their own vehicles.
yeah.
But I
Even though I don't see that happening, but.
You can have a single family home with 3,
Yeah,
or
you
4
two
cars.
parents
yeah.
and a teenager.
Sure.
and also
Right,
you're-
yeah.
you're-
Well, you know,
Yeah,
4
but-
cars.
yeah. And so, like, a strategy combined with the fact that if we're gonna look at alternative household arrangements too, where you don't necessarily have to split up a home into separate dwelling units, and it makes it easier to have roommates. That might have the same effect at a much more cost-effective manner than just permitting a triplex to be built in that too. So this is the conversation. It's a great conversation.
That's where I feel like the data is important, because there's a lot of, it feels like intuitive, like if you're gonna split it up in 4 units, there's gonna be 4 times more cars, but in reality, that's not the case. And so kind of seeing, like in the modeling, the implications of these sort of decisions is interesting.
Well, and I would argue that, people with bikes are gonna, they were happy to live more than a quarter of a mile away from the BRT station, because they can get there just as fast, with a half a mile or a mile from it. So, I know a lot more people now that ride their bike for all their commuting than 15, 20 years ago, obviously. So, you may not want to, Commissioner Phillips, but a lot of people do.
And I want to what?
You may not want to ride your bike to commute.
Yeah.
Well, I'm busy driving the bus, why would I?
Well, exactly.
I'm wondering if it makes sense to, you know, with idea 1, where you just sort of allow it in all these places, like you said, it's not gonna turn into all of it, that's not all gonna convert, but you allow it. And then just make sure that what's built there fits the form. So you're not gonna end up with, like, if it is gonna be a triplex, it has to feel like the rest of the units in that neighborhood, however that's regulated. But then maybe if you provide that flexibility, you maintain our sense of design conformity.
So you'd have to really work at that, because that would require you to consider a setback condition, whether there is a pitched form versus a flat form.
Sidewall articulation.
Several
all of that
articulations
stuff.
will have, that, so that at the present moment, as long as you meet your setback requirements, as long as you meet the scale as far as height is concerned, whether it's measured from one point or another. For a developer, you've met the requirements. There's nothing else in the zone that says you have to do this.
We're not gonna require brick.
Doesn't, yeah.
I wish we could.
doesn't-
We
we
won't.
could. We could. So that's the tricky part, right? And with these suburban forms, because they are so prevalently residentially single family with the traditional pitch roofs and maybe garages in front, that there's, and you see how they're evolving when you go up McCaslin towards the area where they're actually going to be built, and those are articulated. I mean, they're doing what they had before, they didn't kind of reinvent it in a way. I'm just trying to say, the zoning, the form-based code doesn't allow you to tell the person who wants to do this project that it has to have a pitch roof.
Mhm.
It doesn't tell you that you have to have this garage coming in from this side, so that interpretation is going to be, it's going to have, people are looking for the same form to blend into the neighborhood. It's just,
I mean,
gonna be
unless-
hard.
Unless we decide
Yeah.
within the zoning that we do want to have a very stringent form-based.
Yeah, and that I
We're
think
not
is,
really going
not
that
the direction
direction
we're
here,
going.
yeah, these
No.
neighborhoods, it's
yeah,
way, the geography is just so large and
Yes.
diverse that it would be a challenge, but things like access is pretty common, other things. So,
Yeah, I mean, duplexes are fairly easy to accommodate on a corner lot. Once you start getting higher than that and you wanna provide parking, there's a difference between mandating parking but provide parking. That begins to impact their neighborhood, how that parking is provided more than anything. Cause if all you have at the ground floor is, 3 to 4 garage doors and nothing else, then it starts impacting design. So we need to know what the strategy is first, and then we would go back and look at, okay, what are the standards? Are there lots that are just too shallow that you couldn't get more than just a duplex on it? And so that might factor into limiting the number of units. And then are there certain lots that are deep enough that you could still put the parking in the rear, in a detached structure or a small attached structure, but not have that parking impact the streetscape, and do that. And so those are the things that we would have to look like, but the first step is what do we want to do? And then we would go back and look at the standards around those to make sure that they actually are done fit. And we could, we aren't intending to go full form-based code, but in the existing neighborhoods, but we are tending to have graphical representations. And there could be things that we already have in place in other areas of the community, like Old Town, they do have sidewall articulation standards. And maybe they're easy to implement and make sense on longer structures. We probably would need to look at the maximum width of garage doors based upon the front facade, because I don't think anybody wants to have the snout houses or anything like that of the past. And so we would have to look at those types of things. Maybe we do say that, hey, in our residential neighborhoods, you have a minimum pitch on your roof. There's no flat roof type things, because that's what happened in Denver is they filled up the envelope and everything's turned into squares and cubes. Whether or not the neighborhood, you can do it really tastefully, but more often than not, it wasn't very tasteful. So there was a hand in the audience.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Greg Riching. I own property in Longmont and in Lafayette, and I'm really interested in affordable housing. One of the things I'm concerned about, And I would say the differences between my properties in Longmont, I buy 5-bedroom houses in Longmont, and Longmont allows 5 people to share a house. You got a family of 10, but I'd say 5 single unrelated people. Lafayette, I may have a 4-bedroom house or townhouse or whatnot, you can only have 3 people. And actually during COVID, I had to evict a few people because there were 4 people living in a townhouse with 4 compliant bedrooms. But the city of Lafayette said, no, you can't do that, you don't have 3, because somehow someone had complained. I thought it was terrible during COVID, being someone find housing during that time. But anyway, what I was thinking though is that aside from land costs and things like that, one reason why Longmont is less expensive per bedroom is because you allow higher density in terms of the number of people per house. In the case of Lafayette, what's really interesting is that the property I have right now, and I only bought 1 townhouse, but it's a triplex on a corner, about 9,000 square feet, 3 lots, 9,000 square feet. And when I first drove up to it, because I was actually working for the city of Lafayette at the time, I just happened to go by lunch hour. I drove by it, and I thought it was a duplex because I was only seeing the corner. And I went around the other corner, there was a catch it. So there, what you were saying, like a 0 lot line kind of thing. I super insulated those homes, blue and cellulose and things like that. So the sound hasn't been really an issue. I have found that if it were allowed, 12 people could live on this 9,000 square foot house, with 1 person per bedroom. That's my recommendation. If there's any zoning, base it on compliant bedrooms more than anything else. I want to ask you guys, whenever we design this thing, we'll look at it from the perspective of affordable housing. And I would like whatever option that allows the, highest density, because as far as I'm concerned, I would rather have more people living if there are 2 houses on the same, 10,000 a lot, 2 5,000 square foot lots. I would rather have higher density put together than 2 houses there. But I think to me, it's a function of bedrooms. I kind of think if you limit the number of bedrooms, it's going to naturally work itself out, 1 person per bedroom, if you would go with that as a limit. So that's my feedback.
The memo you'll be getting about families, I think, in a similar kind of approach. So thank you for that comment.
Yeah, I think, there's probably a lot of agreement, is my guess, in this room about relaxing our regulations on how many people can be in a house. Seems that's a little too stringent. But if I can have the floor for about 2 minutes, I did some thinking this afternoon about density and affordability. And before we start talking about these options here, is it true? And I think the answer is yes, that the reason we're talking about these at all, these are all densification proposals, is in the name of affordability. That's the prime driver.
Availability, yeah.
Is that pretty much true why we're proposing these things?
Number of units
And
and
A
affordability.
mixture of housing types to support people at different life stages.
Yeah, but density overall, these are all densification projects. The driving goal in most municipalities is density, is affordability. I kind of want to push back on that a little bit.
Yeah, but I don't agree with that.
Well, let me, I did some looking into this. On table 1, we have, one proposal is estimated to get like 3,500 more people with 1,500 more units and so on and so forth. Well, I looked at a couple hours online, and from 1990 till now, the median home price in Boulder County has gone up about 5.5% per year. Another site told me that between 1980 and now, it's gone up about 5.2% per year. That's a big rate of inflation. At the same time, Lafayette's grown at about 3.1% per year population. And so the housing prices at 5 point something per year, let's assume I'm right, or my sources are right. The US dollar inflation during that time has been 3%. Wages in Boulder County have only grown by like 1%. So you can see that housing is really outpacing not just wages, but even the inflation of money. And I think implicit in what the legislature is trying to push, and the proposals up here, is that more construction and densification will make housing more affordable. But here's the thing, over the past 40 years, Lafayette's housing rate has gone up probably proportionately to people. Wasn't able to find that, but let's say it's in the 3% range that our population has grown, the number of houses has grown. Hope you'll accept that as roughly true. And that's over 3 times faster than the rest of the country and almost double the rate of Colorado as a whole. And so we've been building pretty well compared to the rest of the country and even the state here. But even then, housing prices still outpace wages and inflation by a substantial margin. And I think it might be true in some places that if you build more, you get more density, it becomes more affordable, but I just don't see that here. And implicit in these ideas is that if we just ramp up our densification, that's gonna somehow help the problem. We have an inelastic demand here. What that means is, pretty steep demand curve, but the ultimate result is that a larger increase in price represents a relatively small decrease in the demand. And that's because people want to live here and they're willing to pay a premium to do so. And so what we end up with is dense cities like Denver and Boulder, which are the 4th and 5th most dense cities in the state. And they're also number 1 and 2 in terms of median home price. I don't know if Aspen was included in that, doesn't matter. The point is, 2 of the biggest, most dense cities in the state, and they're 2 of the most unaffordable by far. And so I just really don't buy this density and affordability correlation here. I think it's kind of a red herring, and also, I'd really like to keep sustainability front and center in this, because there's not really anything sustainable about continuing to build thousands of new units at any given time. Since I've been paying attention to what's been going on in the city, we've had minimum between 1,000 and 2,000 new units either under construction or in the pipeline at all times. There's a saying like safety first as long as it gets in the way. Well, I mean, is it sustainability first as long as it doesn't get in the way of real estate development? And finally, I just want to remind everybody, the comp plan was done with a survey that went out to every resident in Lafayette. And in response to the questions of what is your priority to develop smaller lots with higher density, 76% of the people said it's not a priority. 56% of the people said no priority, we don't want that, or it's a low priority, and only 26% said yes, it's a medium or high priority. We also asked them, people in Lafayette who were here on the behalf of, it's not, let's keep that in mind. In answer to the second question, is it a priority for you to develop higher density by building up to 3 stories or more? 69% said low priority or no priority. And only 18% said medium or high priority. That's as loud. We directly asked people of Lafayette what they thought. And those answers are as loud and clear as you'll get on any survey of anyone at any time.
Affordability was also a high priority.
It is.
I understand that your logic there, but I think the actual data shows otherwise, that density does correlate
Where?
correctly.
Could you bring some of that to the next meeting?
So the answer is Houston. Okay, if you want data that shows availability drives, controls price, go to someplace like Houston. Now, there are downsides to places like Houston too, but, so Seth, your point is, people don't want to see the look and feel of Lafayette and the Front Range change, but we want affordable housing. Well, I'm sorry, you cannot have a tall, short, fat, skinny kid. Okay, you gotta make choices.
But this also isn't Houston.
Okay.
And what my argument is that in some places it may be true where if you build more, densify, go up.
Well,
It could work. I don't see that here, and I've
There are
right.
many variables.
got some numbers.
where are we on the curve? That's the question, Seth, is where are we on the curve? And are we willing to constrain availability of housing, which drives affordability? Are we willing to constrain that to the point where we're Boulder and the median house price is at $1.2 million?
The problem goes back to over the last 20 years, existing housing units, in relative to population demand in the United States, housing shortage of 3.2 million units. Because it was not profitable to build houses after the economy crashed in 2008. So we started to have fewer and fewer and fewer housing units. So we have a supply and demand issue. And yes, if the supply goes up, the demand will go down. I mean, it's just economics. And here we are in capitalism, but also we have people that don't have homes. And it's just not, we can't expect that. Is it going to be, will it take a while? Absolutely. I don't know if we'll ever level out here because this is a very desirable place to live. But we can't just say, no, we're not gonna build anymore because, it's not ever gonna actually get you.
I think the underlying structure
simplifying
you just identified is that wages have not caught up with what we really can't afford anymore. And that is not a structure that, you know, I mean, there's countless articles out there, the demise of labor unions, all these kind of things that have contributed to the fact that you don't have very much leverage anymore. So even if you do build as many, and I think it's important to have them available, you still have to go through the system of mortgages and how much you can afford and all of that. And
Yeah.
all that, and it's very,
No.
it's a tricky kind of landscape, and it doesn't really give you very many choices. And so I think by providing, let's say, some of these options, maybe there are a few options available for people to be able to move into that
The
category.
EDU thing that we're doing, I think will help people, but when I see proposed additions to our zoning, and I'm sure this won't be the last of them. And I know that you put this in here, because a lot of this is maybe being driven from above, because that's just like kind of like, taken directly from some of the bills that are up there, but, we've been building in Lafayette faster than the rest of the state for 40 years. And if I'm right, we're in the 3% or so per year range of new housing units. And the answer, and we're as unaffordable, I mean, Denver and Boulder, and we're right in between, we're damn unaffordable. And when I hear people tell me that the answer is to build more, I just don't buy it. It does not, it flies in the face of practical experience.
But the other thing that's happening here is it's not just building more, it's putting more people in the same space. So,
Yeah, well,
Right.
what's our build at?
so like this would allow smaller units, which
Yeah, and-
like per square foot may not be cheaper.
Can we just have it
But
built?
maybe absolutely cheaper for somebody to get into if it's a smaller unit. So if you're allowing what was a single family home to now be a duplex,
Yeah, no,
We
and I
haven't
But
been
are we
building
gonna
those
get
things, we
those
haven't been
small-
building these smaller units, because
Right,
it hasn't been
exactly.
lucrative, that the
Yeah.
developers have said, I need X dollars,
Well, we-
and I need X square
We're
foot.
building those units because of construction defects. We won't build condominiums and townhomes anymore. And that's the type of housing that we need to be more affordable. It's gone. So we
Is
try to
the
build-
construction
we
defects
build
law
small
going
detached
to?
homes, and that's the only thing that we can build that avoids
Yeah, but
that. So that's
Well, we built thousands of new apartments in Lafayette. You could go down, you go down to
apartments, not
87.
for sale. Anything for
Yeah.
sale.
That's, apartments versus condos.
That's why
But
it's
it's
all
still, but it's still an affordability thing. It's the same argument. It's still a housing unit.
I was at a meeting with developers a few years ago, and I was talking about Happy's. But, I asked them, I said, if we gave you a break on some of these here, if we gave you more density, would you sell your homes for less? And they almost all said, no, it's market price. So I kind of agree with you that won't bring costs down. Because as long as people wanna live here, more people wanna live here than live here, costs are not coming down. So I wish you could solve it, but I haven't seen a solution yet anywhere, but I applaud you for trying to solve it.
But
I think the whole market price thing is what you're saying. So if like what Davi was saying, if you have a 2,500 square foot house and you divide it in half and now you have two, it's not gonna, the duplex is not gonna be the same price as the 25 square foot house. It's just not. It's
You
gonna
got
be
two,
much
yeah.
cheaper for
and it
whoever
won't
wants
be
to buy
half the
that.
price,
Yeah,
but you will be able to have two. people
exactly.
living in
I
that
think,
space.
there's no avoiding
Two
that.
families.
If you
Double
do-
price.
yeah, I don't think people, well, I mean, when people are pricing homes, they're pricing them apart based on square footage, a smaller house.
And the other thing is, if you're building,
I think,
Well, yeah, small, I mean, but it's just the market though. Well, I'm not saying it's cheap, but I'm saying it's cheaper than the larger home.
if you, like, if somebody was gonna knock off half your house, would you say it's now worth the same price as it was before? No, it would be worth less because it's smaller. Like,
and the other thing that it allows is, okay, I wanna downsize from a 2,500 square foot home, I wanna go live in a 1,500 square foot home, and somebody else is gonna buy this house. And they're gonna move out of their apartment, or they're gonna move out of their smaller condo and upsize, and it allows for that shift to happen. And if you build 10 new units, then some of the older units are going to be vacated and sold for less, and I mean, are costs gonna keep going up? Yes, but is there gonna be more supply? Yes.
And
I think your point about taking an existing house and dividing it in half and then selling the two or renting the two, of course, those two will cost less than the one. But we're getting kind of granular, but a counterexample of that is if you take a house of a smaller size and scrape it and build a house that's a duplex, that's a bigger size. Well, those units are gonna be damn expensive. They might be more than whatever the person that and the market is there, so it's pretty
This
granular.
is back to quality of housing, right? Like a new house is worth more than an old house sometimes.
Yeah.
Typically,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of variables, and I think like when you look en masse at the nation, higher density equals to lower housing prices, and I know that some people are uncomfortable with that, but that's just the facts of the matter. And I don't know why we're like.
But not here. My
continue-
point is it's not here.
Well-
And then I agree with you. The last workshop the planning commission had was, what can we do to make Lafayette more desirable? So we're gonna increase that desirability. Until those flat irons move 50 miles that way, we're still gonna have that same desirability. And I don't think you can quantify that impact on prices.
Yeah, exactly.
But
It's
for this,
inelastic
for
demand.
what we're doing here, we're saying, I mean, I think what's being proposed is let's allow
Yeah. Allow
more
it,
units
doesn't mean it's
in
going
the
to
same
happen.
space in places where the developer wants to do that, you know, the market allows for that. So that those units can be
Can
cheaper
evolve.
than
Evolve.
what they would have been as a single.
But do you- I don't think we're
If you
just
took a
talking
duplex
about
lot that you
but
paid $1 million for it, and you put if you took one house for $1 million and you put a duplex on there, you're going to sell that duplex for probably 1.8 million each side. It's not gonna lead to that model you see in Denver, primarily in Denver, you see it.
Yeah.
But it's not gonna lead to cheaper housing. You have to scrape an existing home that's not completely obsolete.
Yeah.
That you can, tear down in 10 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, like, what you're saying is not untrue, especially when it comes to duplexes, right? But it's, so the way I think about it is like, it is more sustainable because you use less infrastructure per household, you use less water per household. You, have more people that support the idea of transit, whether or not they use it or not, but it makes it more feasible. You have, you start attracting a critical mass of retail and services that can survive in a smaller market area, and that drives like walkability and some other stuff. So, but it requires pretty big change, but the way I'm looking at this is, it enables something that's not allowed right now, potentially. And it enables these smaller units in a manner that fits in with the existing character of the community. Because right now we're getting single family detached and big apartment buildings, like massive apartment buildings.
Yeah.
There's nothing in between. And Lafayette is finite. We have a finite footprint, intentionally. And so how, as a community, do we continue to thrive while welcoming people who need housing, with different housing choices? And like, this is not gonna enable scraping. A lot of people, the economics have to make sense, and yeah.
That will.
Yeah,
In a lot of cases, it will.
I mean, someday. it will.
well, in certain neighborhoods it might, but like, I think
Doesn't hold.
the key is like, if you're going to build, two 2,500 square foot duplexes, they're gonna be $1 million plus duplexes. And we have to figure that out, but if you allow 3 900 square foot homes or something like that, which I think, Martell's are doing, they're doing some side-by-side triplexes, then that caters to a starter home and a smaller home and a smaller price per square foot, and there's efficiencies there, and if you replicate that too, and like, I think it's just goes to choice and ability, and I don't know if like ADUs are gonna be impactful to converting existing homes dividing existing homes is probably gonna be more impactful and cheaper than scraping and all this other stuff. So I think it's about enabling certain things to happen, but we need to make sure that we guard, and Portland is trying to do this, we guard against, or at least acknowledge that, there will be some $1 million outcomes to this. We see it in Old Town, because we require big duplexes to some extent, and that drives up the price. So
I'm not
it's
sure
not,
that we require it, but you can build up to it.
you can build up to it, right?
So
Yeah.
that's, everybody's gonna build as much as they can.
Exactly.
Do you want a big
exactly.
house or a
Yeah.
big yard?
Yeah, so
People think.
you're right, it's a very complex thing, and you're not wrong and nobody else is, like, there, all these things that we're saying are true. So, it's just whether or not we want to enable it. Just one more thing, and this is personal, this is not me talking on behalf of the city. On these surveys, I know the surveys are important, but when you ask somebody who has a house, whether building another house is a priority, I don't think we're gonna get that as a high priority. And it's not about the people that have houses, it's about the people that are looking for houses. That want to live in the community near where they work or nearby where they work. And enabling people to live in the community. That's how I think about housing in general. And how do we do it in a way in Lafayette that is in character with Lafayette? That corresponds to the limited land that we have left to get just a more vibrant community. Like, more people is more vibrancy generally. It also leads to more neighbors, which is not necessarily vibrant.
Well, it's also in terms of sustainability for a community as
Yeah.
well, more resources, more everything. And the populations, I've been living here, the population at build out
Yeah.
that I've heard at city council meetings and this board and that board, it's gone from, we'll be at 27,000, 28,000, well, build out, we're gonna be at 31,000, which is, we passed that now. Then now it's 35, now 36, at some point.
Yeah.
And then, does this sound snotty? And it's not. And you're like, oh, how many people are gonna let in with my community? You're like, where are we headed? Where are we headed? Like, how big is this city gonna be?
I
I
think
think that
the
we
question,
keep building and densifying. Like, where are we headed?
where do we want to be headed? And that's maybe the question we need to really ask.
Yeah, because the number just keeps going up and up and up, it's like, well, there's no such thing as sustainable growth.
So this is a nice place to live. People wanna live in nice places.
And people are still having babies. I mean,
Yeah, we
there's
gotta
people
stop
are still
procreating,
having
but-
kids. You can't just stop
Yeah,
population
but
growth.
people die too versus the kids, but it's, how many new houses do we wanna make? How many more?
So the question is, what do you wanna pay for them?
How much sort of ask
You
the
don't want to
question
be
is,
house, you're gonna pay for it.
you can't control any of the market issues. You can't control whether a developer decides that that duplex is $1 million or $500,000. What we can control is the form in which these things take place. And I think that's what we're here to do.
How do you incentivize a properly scaled, properly mapped,
Yeah.
building?
That's what I was just asking Jeff, can we limit duplex sizes? Because right now, what I see is everybody builds to the lot coverage that they can build. Upstairs, downstairs, basement, you've got a big ass duplex. And if it were something like, okay, your duplex has to be a certain size,
Yeah, there's, like, when I referenced Portland, I don't know, it may not work, like, it's not exactly working in Portland, but they looked at how do you incentivize the more units and the smaller unit sizes? And it correlated to allowed lot coverage and other things, and so the single family home had a smaller lot coverage. Then the duplex had a slightly larger lot coverage, but then the quadplex had a bigger lot coverage, but it enabled viable unit sizes to be built in theory, right? So yeah, there's ways to do that. There's a complexity that you can add into the zoning to do that.
So.
Yeah.
Jeff, how much do we hold conversations with our neighboring municipalities? Because we're not solving this problem on our own.
No,
Yeah, there's a lot of work regionally happening, especially around affordable housing. There's
There's a great article I
significant.
sent you, that one where, the one that was, what they did in, a neighborhood in Houston or something, or Maryland, I don't remember that, where the, state, the, housing authority and another group, those are all separate entities, that applied for vouchers for housing, affordable housing. They just decided to come together, and all of a sudden, their pool got really huge, and they were able to create housing that was, you wouldn't recognize it from any other. I'll resend it to the group if you want to. It was a fascinating study on how it's able to be, you can actually do it, but it requires coordination between entities that don't necessarily coordinate. So,
I like what Vicky was saying about the size though, and thinking about what Seth was saying about sustainability, and I think a big part of that is the size of the building per person. So I wonder if like that size of unit is something that we should focus on instead of
Yeah,
total unit.
yeah, and it might be something, like, if that's the way we wanna go, it might be something that we just put on the side burner for now. And, cause that's gonna take a little bit of work. And I think some of the work that we're gonna look at in the new neighborhoods, where the new neighborhoods are from the ground up meant to be built as a mixed housing neighborhood, that might help us figure out this infill stuff too. Like, there's a lot of just perspective, but I think generally, we're gonna try to, we're hearing, yeah, great,
Yeah.
say it. Do
Yeah.
the summary.
Number,
generally.
number one, I've really missed these conversations.
Yeah.
They're super interesting and we really appreciate it. In terms of like the what, where, how, the what, I'm not hearing that like there's specific buildings outside of this prospect townhome that we need to like kind of take off the table as far as future discussions. But there's a lot of interest in really making sure the fit is there and that, and that aligns with the rest of the block. I'm not hearing that we're taking off any of the particular ideas. And so I think at this point, we would probably kind of start doing some more analysis and research to start trying to answer some of the questions that are being brought up, but I didn't hear anyone kind of taking any of these off the table.
I vote for taking out number 3.
Number
I think that's
3.
this meeting.
You know, number 3 is, there's no BRT stations built right now. So it's something that in the future that we could consider. That's not mentioned in the comp plan. It's mentioned, the first 2 are directly from the comp plan, so.
Because remember, when we're saying only corner lots and only corridors, that means that you're essentially taking away the rights of property owners in mid-block to do this.
Yep.
That is what we're doing. And saying you can't do that with your house, even if you've got a random big lot, even if you know, get there is, but that's what we're saying. These people have rights that you don't.
If you're taking them away, or you're actually giving these other lots.
Kind of both ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, you're saying because the underlying zoning currently allows it and won't allow it.
I'm saying that if we pick all of these options, you're saying people within a quarter of a mile of this will be able to do it, no matter whether they live mid-block or corner or on a collector. With the corner lots, you're saying the folks at mid-block won't have the right to do a duplex or triplex. So it's just.
Well, are you saying that?
Yeah, that's
Yep.
what this is saying.
It
So-
includes,
It includes, so even if you have a wide lot or a deep lot or something that you might think, oh, I could put a duplex on here, you wouldn't be able to do that by right.
So maybe there's kind of 2 buckets here. There's the comp plan implementation that we're focusing on, which is really like idea number 1. But if there's a policy thing that I think the group wants to flag for council to consider, we've developed some regulations for these corner lots and collector streets. We think it's, to be just, we should consider it elsewhere in these neighborhoods, then that's something that we could.
Yeah, I mean, it might
carry forward.
be, if you've got a certain linear foot frontage, you know, you should be able to, if you've got a certain lot size. And then that begins to get, again, really granular, you know, is this really the right thing to do in this particular large lot? It might be, might not be.
I came late, so I don't know if we already talked about maximum lot size.
Yep.
Okay,
Well, yeah, we're planning to do it.
yeah, great. We should.
Yeah.
Work with that.
And we really want to, when thinking about these things, really have an eye towards affordability, sustainability. Jeff's Portland example, scaling lot coverage, unit size, things like that, so that we're really moving the needle on affordability and sustainability goals and not.
So we keep throwing out affordability. And the reality is currently, if you want affordable housing, it's either heavily subsidized or it's a mobile home park. If we avoid talking about either. So it's like, if we're serious about affordability, then that has to be part of the discussion.
Yeah.
We haven't talked about tiny homes, and I've seen the neighborhoods where you have a 900, a row, 100 homes in a new neighborhood where there's 900 square foot, 2-story tiny homes, and that could move the needle.
But that's the same concept as a mobile home park. You have to zone
Yeah, those are
the whole area for tiny homes.
Those aren't tiny homes, that's a different, tiny home is totally different, where it's just
Yeah.
a separate, it's just a structure you plop down. That's just a small home.
Yeah, and that's what I've seen that I think could fit into this community and maybe move the needle on this, where I think the conventional tiny home is, it's not a mobile home, but it's a home that you could move and plop down.
So,
So I think we're trying to talk about
That's
similar kind of
that's one of
things.
the things that I'm concerned with is actual tiny homes, you know,
Yeah.
250 square feet, 175 square feet. I think that's a fad. And I think if we start building that into our code and things like that, we could find ourselves in 10 years facing a whole egg carton full of things that nobody wants.
What about the minor home size homes that are just more dense? What's your thought on that?
Well,
They used to be
built
900 square feet.
built 900 square feet.
Came off, yeah.
Let's not exclude small houses on any side. Let's not put anything in the code, so you can't build anything smaller than 700, you know, it's.
Yeah, so we have talked with some of the mobile home park owners about, would you be interested in, would your tenants be interested in like a tiny home product if it was allowed? And I think it could already be allowed pretty much like in those areas, but the answer is yes, they're interested in it. And so in those places, those contexts, it probably does make sense.
Yeah. So just something else, like all these innovative housing types that we're talking about, like, what I don't know, like, I think it's important to remember what's in the comp plan. Like, we're proceeding under that, we don't have a mandate to do a massive change within existing neighborhoods. And so, but and I wouldn't say massive change, but the changes in the new developments, that's where the different outcomes that we're trying to, like, where we can do some of this innovative stuff is. It could be that we like that so much that collectively the community says, well, why would we exclude what is able to happen in these new neighborhoods from our existing neighborhood? I think, and have that conversation in the future. But I just want us to keep in mind, like, the reason we're proposing the zoning structure that we have is because we don't think there's a mandate in the comprehensive plan to do massive change within existing neighborhoods. If we want to envision that, I think that's a different project, but we will probably have the tools in the zoning code, should that, the community want to have that conversation. We can have those tools that can be easily replicated throughout the community as well.
I mean, I guess the question would be, duplexes on those corners and stuff, what if those were little cottage homes or
Yeah, kind of homes.
it seems like there could be more flexibility there, where it's not just duplexes like we have everywhere else.
Are we gonna still revisit the topic of inclusionary zoning? Because we sort of touched on it briefly, but I mean, in terms of, we can argue, I mean, I can argue what I'm doing in the face about my little numbers and what have you. And how I feel about density and affordability, but it's like open space, you only can really guarantee open space if you apply it,
Yeah.
right? And then,
We are considering it this year separately from this project, and so it's something that
oh, shouldn't that be part of this project? I mean, it's zoning.
probably live in a different section of the code, but it'll certainly relate, and you all will have to be in the loop on those discussions.
Yeah,
but-
please do keep us informed, because that's, I mean, that's like meat and potatoes right there.
Yeah.
You know?
Regionally, there's a real effort on all the cities. We meet almost weekly, to coordinate, and there's a lot of interest in inclusionary housing really throughout the region. So with that said, unless folks have other things, if you wrote anything down, I'm happy to take that too from your, as you're leaving, but we wanted to allow Sean, our consultant, some time to also talk next steps. Was there anything else that we didn't get to in this discussion? I think it was meaty and really good, and probably it might be the last time we discussed this. I think we have enough to probably start taking some next steps on it, though, do some more analysis. So Sean.
Hi there.
Hi.
All right. I've been listening the whole time, and it's been a very interesting discussion. A lot of threshold questions to be answered, also a lot of details. As Phil mentioned, we're in module 2 of the 3 modules of the project. We did the diagnostic. Module 1, module 2 is calibration. Module 3 is actually putting this all together in a code book. So this calibration is sort of this roll up your sleeves kind of messy part of the project where we have to figure out what is the right scale, size, density, uses, all that kind of stuff for Lafayette. And so that's what we're working through now. In March, we're going to be working through a number of these issues, trying to kind of finalize the existing neighborhood zones. There are a few remaining issues we need to engage with you on. And that'll take place, I believe, in at the April working group meeting, where we're going to want to talk home occupations, specifically parking, and then the alternative development standards that were raised around the PUDs today in a little more detail. And then we'll, after we meet with you and get your feedback on that, we'll start building those districts out, so we can start seeing how they work and how they look and feel. We do have to get this out to the broader public, and that is the big push this spring during the calibration phase. So we're going to be holding a number of focused engagement sessions. One of those will be educational around what's not going to change. I think everybody in the community needs to understand that a lot of things aren't going to change, right? And then there'll be engagement around what is going to change or what is proposed to be changed per the comp plan. And we're probably going to use a site or two as an example to see how all this can work, especially the form-based sections, and to illustrate and engage in a multi-part way with this group, the broader public, through multiple means, and then a developer roundtable, and ultimately leading to a report that concludes sort of all the information and feedback. And then we will be off to codification, hopefully in July. The plan is to finish Module 2 calibration in June and start codifying the code in July, because we want to get a draft out by the end of the year. So it's exciting times. It was a little quiet there for a little while when we were working through some of this stuff. But right now, this is, you're going to be hearing and seeing a lot about this project, and as well as the larger community being engaged. So over the next few months. So buckle up, get ready, get all your questions out there. This was a good time to kind of start thinking about all these issues again tonight. And we look forward to seeing you a lot more over the next few months. Bill, anything else on that?
When will the focus session start? Is it spring? Do we have actual dates?
So we're proposing that we have the second Wednesday in April as our next meeting. And I think that would be probably a good time to kind of preview what some of that might look like.
Okay.
We had a meeting with the sub-consultants this week to kind of start planning that out. And so we're expecting in probably next week to get a more detailed schedule from them of what that might look like. So there's probably going to be, some citywide engagement around, especially some of the big commercial areas. There's probably going to be some, we want to engage with developers about some things as well, in a similar fashion. And then there might be some opportunities for more focused engagement on other topics like Old Town residential. There's some minor tweaks maybe we want to make. Maybe there's some opportunities for like focus groups that we can easily kind of hold City Hall or someplace else. And so I think we just want to figure out what those things are, kind of get it on the books.
Yeah, for the new, like the big mixed use zone districts and the commercial and the new housing zone districts. One thing that we kind of have to get a little better understanding is where the state legislation is going to go. Because it will significantly, if it turns into a real thing that gets passed and those people don't get voted out of office, it's gonna turn into a real impact on how we approach this project. So, so that's why we have to be a little slow right now on the bigger new development standards. Because we want a little bit of clarity. We don't want to waste time on that.
What's the time frame on that, Bill? I don't know what the dates are in this current session.
Yeah, it's by May.
It introduced last week. So I think there's been a bit of opposition that's come out against it. And we're gonna talk to council on Tuesday, so they will be able to get some direction and engage.
So we don't intend to use the fourth Tuesday of the month as a working
No.
recurring.
There was some kind of development application that had to be reviewed, I think, on Valentine's Day, sorry, Planning Commission. So we had to push this meeting to tonight, so.
So you mentioned the second Wednesday, not the second Tuesday of April?
Yeah, Wednesday, so the normal Planning Commission time, yep. So that would
So
be,
we will get into that cadence then where working group is the second Wednesday. So
sorry, the second
the
one.
second Wednesday, which is the first planning commission meeting.
Yep.
And then the fourth Wednesday will be a traditional planning commission. Understood. Thank you.
Any, I guess, the only other thing on the agenda, I believe, was any further comments from members, staff, or the public?
Yeah, any other comments from the public?
Stephen, does everyone know Stephen, by the way? Stephen joined the city as our planning manager, a long time ago now. Several months at least.
That's all right.
Yeah. Well, it's been great, and we are looking forward to the next discussion. Cool. Thanks a lot, Sean. Take care.
Thank you all.
Sure.